You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of truth. A dimension of freedom. A dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the Capitalist Corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Welcome, everyone, to the Capitalist Corner Monday edition for a special episode with Jim Valiant, where he will be addressing your questions on immigration. But before we get to that, please remember the super chats and super stickers. We very much like them. A little bit of housekeeping. So Thursday, there will be no episodes at all. Friday, there will be no Capitalist Corner, but there will be Everyday Ethics, and we will be making up for Thursday's Crime, Corrections, and Culture. Also, because we have so many shows now on the channel, originally it was just going to be the Capitalist Corner, so the channel was called the Capitalist Corner. But now we have the Capitalist Corner, we've got the Capitalist Corner Weekend Edition, we've got Everyday Ethics, we've got Crime, Corrections, and Culture, and hopefully more to go. Maybe I can talk Jim into doing one, I don't know. So we've changed the name of the channel to The Rational Alternative, which is great. This week, we've got some good stuff coming up on The Rational Egoist. Wednesday, I will be interviewing a professor on the history of atheism. And Friday, I will be having a debate on ethics with Professor Mike Humer. But without further ado, and please go to Twitch. Sign up for us on Twitch. And also recognize that we're on Spotify. All our shows are over there. So we got all kinds of stuff going on. But without further ado, Jim, welcome back to the show here.
Howdy. Hello. I know you don't like my Western.
No, I love it. I love it. I love the word howdy. I don't love being kicked to the curb for the Israeli. That is where I draw the line.
Well, on Friday, there was... Are you still bitching and moaning about Friday?
I am bitching and moaning. Yes, I'm bitching and moaning.
Well, I'm sorry things didn't work out.
It's okay. It's fine. But we do have some comments and we have some questions that we're going to get to. First, we'll get to the stuff that I have here from the other day. And Persephone, is there also the question from the website? Is that in there too? It's the last one? Okay, so I'm going to we'll address the comments from the other day. Mr. Deagle says, my stand is that unless the government has a specific reason to think that somebody is a criminal, terrorist, or sick, it has no right to stop them from entering the country. What say you, Jim?
The government restricts the movement of innocent, non-rights respecting people all the time. The classic example is the yellow tape that we see in front of a crime scene, for example. Let me give you a clear example. We see someone committing a shooting, a mass murder, let's say, and he runs into a skyscraper. We know for a fact a horrible criminal is in that skyscraper. We also know that there's hundreds of other people in that skyscraper. Can the government cordon off that skyscraper, restrict the movement of totally non-rights violating, totally innocent people, even though we know there's only one criminal in there and there's hundreds of innocent people in there? Have we restricted their freedom of movement? You're damn right we've restricted their freedom of movement. It's totally reasonable. And if I were one of those people in the skyscraper, I'd be darn grateful that they checked, that they cordoned off, didn't allow anyone in or out of that building until they zeroed in on the criminal. The existence of one criminal in that building filled with hundreds of innocent people gives the government the right to restrict the freedom of movement of those people. Now, to make turn the analogy inside out, we know that from the great unknown beyond our borders, where there's a variety of jurisdictions, legal jurisdictions, a variety of cultures that are around us, we know that if we have no restrictions, some criminals, a certain percentage of criminals will come in. So it's like the inverse of the restricted movement of building. So it would be a nice world if we didn't have to restrict sometimes the freedom of movement of innocent people. Wouldn't it be great? But that is just not realistic, given the fact that we know a certain amount of terrorists, a certain amount of criminals, a certain amount of spies, a certain amount of people who advocate the destruction of America will come in. Now, maybe a small percentage, but what percentage? If one person going into a skyscraper can restrict temporarily and in context, and note the government isn't asserting property ownership over the skyscraper. They're just saying under this circumstance, the freedom of movement of totally rights respecting innocent people will be in this context restricted.
But
So
Jim,
let's say well, go. No.
no, in that case, though, there's a specific crime and a specific danger that's been identified. It's not the possibility. I mean, by the reasoning. So here's the
there
here's
will
the
be
problem.
criminals who
Well,
come in if you don't
okay,
have vetting.
well, we know that there will be a given amount of criminals will cross from Connecticut to Massachusetts. We know there will be X amount of mass shootings in a given year, but we only do the type of cording off that you're talking about if there's a specific threat identified. But in the case of immigration, it's not,
back to the difference between Connecticut and Massachusetts and between all the foreign countries in the world and the United States. There is a qualitative difference. There are countries in this world. Look, there are people. It's just, I don't even need to say it. We know, just as we know when the criminal goes into that skyscraper, we know there's a certain percentage of criminals that'll come into the country if we don't vet. That's just a fact. And think of it. Give you dozens of cases recently. The Chinese person who was developing a biolab in LA and then in Las Vegas, for example. We know that will happen. What about this Iranian lady who's shipping arms to Iran? In the international context, it's still worse because if you're dealing with large numbers of people, we know that there's so what you're saying is my freedom of movement means I can't even be temporarily. I believe in immigration. I believe that innocent, law-abiding, rights-respecting people should be allowed in. Now, all I'm asking is, in a specific context, is that you wait for a vetting. I would be grateful for that. Because, you see, I don't want criminals to be in this place or fewer criminals to be in that place. So we know it's not a question of a question mark. We know a certain percentage of criminals will be coming in. And there's a huge difference conceptually between traveling between one state and another where records can be shared and we know who these people are and their backgrounds are. When people come into the United States, it's not like when people move from Connecticut to New York. We've been vetting them. Like I say, all of us have been vetted all of our lives. We have some idea, of the internal population already. We have no idea about the external population.
But Jim, that won't. I'm going to New York on Thursday.
Yeah.
I have a very extensive criminal history. They vetted it, but I'm still going, and I'm not going to. I'm not going to be followed around. At least I
no, indeed. But you know something? You can't own a gun in New York. You can't own a gun in Connecticut, and they can find out if you've got a gun instantly. Oh, he's a felon.
Oh, they can.
Well, if a cop pulls you over, they can see criminal record.
Of course, but that's kind of the point. Is they can't, because I might be carrying a gun. They can't just start pulling over everybody.
No. Obviously, within the United States, that's why it's important to have Fourth Amendment protections, for example, both outside and inside, in a sense, the United States. But look, if they do have reason to suspect you, and they do find a gun on you, they can easily see, oh, this is a guy who shouldn't have a gun. We can't do that with people coming into the country unless we do the background check. Foreigners should not be treated better than you, Michael.
Nobody should be treated better than me.
Well, no, but the point is we would be treating foreign criminals better than we'd be treating you.
The local criminal?
You'd be treated much worse than someone who came in unvetted. Because we wouldn't know whether they had a felony. We wouldn't know whether they should possess a gun or not. We wouldn't know whether they have a... So you should not be discriminated against because you're a U.S.-born criminal.
Okay, so Bonnie Bertrand, this isn't really a question, but it is a comment. I want to get your take on it. She says, Objectivism identifies why man must be free. In parentheses, she says, the volitional nature of human consciousness. The need for an individual's freedom of action is absolute, but borders are part of the identity of a government, and maintaining borders in a way that protects the individual rights of that nation's citizens is an issue of objective law. What say you to that, Jim?
I agree, fundamentally. The borders of a country are fundamental. Within the borders of a country, we can do all kinds of things. We can treat you, for example, the way we do, Michael, and there are all kinds of disabilities, unfortunately, on people who commit crimes, and they're designed to protect everybody's safety. If we don't have the same criminal background check on people coming into the country that we've done on you, Michael, then they would be given a leg up. Whatever their criminal history, they'd be being treated better than you. So, but look at the world. I mean, in some places, like I said last time, the definitions of murder and rape are different. You might be coming in from a country that really does think it's okay to rape your spouse. You might be coming in from a country that thinks, an honor killing is not murder. Or worse, you could be coming in from a country, for example, that actually means hostility to the United States, Russia, China, and Iran, or some terrorist group. Okay, so the problem gets even magnified when it comes to, foreign countries, as opposed to already being in here, right? I don't want you to be discriminated against in favor of foreign criminals. The thing is, in the best case scenario, take a country like Canada or Great Britain. There we have a reasonable assurance that it's at least substantially similar laws, substantially similar due process. And so if criminal conviction, that's the good case scenario. But those people convicted of a crime have lost certain rights once they've been convicted of a crime. The conviction of a crime means you lose certain rights. That's the best case scenario for knowledge. There are places in this world that are anarchistic, that are hostile to the United States, that have absolutely, like I say, different definitions of what crimes are. Okay, so the best case scenario is the case where we know the person's been convicted of a crime in a decent place, but there it's a proven criminal who's lost certain rights.
But Jim, and this is just my own question. What do you do in the case of a country that you have a failed state, let's say Somalia?
Yeah.
Or I'm thinking of Haiti. I don't know if it's a failed state, but it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah. So and a citizen or an individual from that country wants to come to the United States, but they're not going to have good records of that person. So how are you going to find out whether that person is
it is
a criminal?
Perfectly reasonable to discriminate against people, discriminate between, against, I don't like that, discriminate between places where we have good knowledge, where we have good information set, and places where we don't. In other words, I'm sorry, Somalis, you're going to have to go through a higher level of investigative process before being allowed into the United States. What the level of investigation is and what the level of suspicion should be, or what the standard of proof. Now, this is something I think that reasonable minds can differ about. The degree of the investigation, the degree of delay that is required in those cases can vary. In some cases, you can simply say no one can come in from that country. For example, given my understanding of the Palestinian community in Gaza, it would be perfectly reasonable for the United States government to say, no, we're not accepting any Palestinians from Gaza. Full stop. There are contexts that severe as well. In other words, it may be unfortunate for you that you're in the 10% of people who are, screaming for Hamas or something as bad as Hamas or something worse than Hamas. But if you're, a small minority, then the vetting is ratcheted up to a certain, let me put it this way, depending on where you're coming from, the vetting process should be ratcheted up in its severity.
But how is that not collectivism, Jim? I mean, if individuals have rights, then presumably the Palestinian individuals have rights, assuming they haven't forfeited them in some way by committing acts of terror or something.
Right.
So, and if innocent until proven guilty is a valid principle, then how do you restrict their movement from coming in here based on the ethnic group or the area from which they come?
Not the ethnic group. Yeah, it's the area. And let me put it this way. At the far end, if we're at war with a country, do you think it's reasonable to restrict immigration from that country? I go to the far end of the security matter. And we'd say, look, I know there must be good German people, but is it okay to restrict immigration from Germany during World War II? Well, look, it's life and death for the people here. And if it does pose a significant risk of life and death to some, look, I can't demand, it's precisely because we don't have the same jurisdiction outside of our borders that we do within, that we have to treat them differently. We can't tell, in other words, if we can't tell and the risk is so high that you might, on the face of it, be a danger, I'm sorry. The government can't violate anybody's rights, but the government within its borders, to go back to Bonnie's point, their charge is to protect the people here, legally here. And remember what they're asking for. They're asking, if you're asking for, and I would make a distinction, this may be a separate topic, but I would ask, is there a distinction between people here who are diplomats, people here on business trips, people here tourists, or people who are seeking permanent residency? Should we make distinctions along those lines? Yeah, we should. But we don't control the jurisdiction of Gaza. We don't control the jurisdiction of Germany. We can't know. It's a box. What do they call it? A black box. What's the classic black box? You don't know what's inside. And we don't have to take the risk against our people. We can protect our people from a rational risk.
All right. Ian Gilmore says, the fact that I am potentially a criminal does not reduce my rights at all. Not more than a fetus potentially being a human gives it rights.
Right. I agree.
But that's the argument, though, Jim, is that
okay, then we have to get rid of the yellow tape. Goodbye, yellow tape. If that's the alternative, then you're saying, well, I'm sorry, I have freedom to go in and out this building. I don't care if you saw a mass shooter go into that building. I have look, you may think I'm one of the 1,000 people in that building. Only one of the 1,000 people in that building is actually the criminal. How dare you restrict my freedom of movement? Right, we restrict the freedom of movement of innocent people all the time for safety purposes.
All right, Persephone, is the question above new stuff from the website? That's Mr. Deagle's from the website? All right, this is from the website, and then we have new stuff.
Okay. And you know, just for the record, I haven't heard or looked at any of these comments. I'm getting them for the first time.
Yeah. Mr. Deagle says, if inside a country, a police officer can stop somebody only if they have a reasonable suspicion that they have committed or will commit a crime, why can they stop people at the border without any reasonable suspicion? Government is not omniscient. They can't know whether every citizen has committed or plans to commit a crime. So if they can't vet citizens, why can they vet immigrants?
Oh, but we do. You see, even if I'm wrong, even if the cop is wrong about reasonable suspicion, he can stop you with reasonable. Remember, it's just suspicion. If a cop has articulable, reasonable suspicion, he can stop and detain you and restrict your freedom of movement, even though you didn't do a damn thing, even though you're totally innocent. Similarly with probable cause can even turn out to be wrong. Remember, it's just probable cause. Now, when it comes to international borders, I am certain that criminals will be coming in if we don't have a border. I am certain a certain percentage will be, maybe a small percentage, but there's no question that it's like knowing that criminal walked into the skyscraper, ran into the skyscraper. I know as a fact. It's not a matter of speculation. And so a short delay for other people is, I'm sorry, what they're going to have to put up with. They cannot expect people. In other words, I can't expect you to allow a certain percentage of criminals in because I have a right to come in. Similarly, I can't demand if I'm innocent, a cop's detention of me on reasonable suspicion is a violation of my freedom of action because I'm innocent. It doesn't turn on your innocence, the reasonableness of the government action in restricting your freedom. It turns on the reasonableness of the threat of harm.
So Ian Gilmore says, Jim is saying that we need to screen immigrants because they have broken laws in other countries and therefore might threaten our rights. What about if I travel to another country? Should the government screen me before I come back into the country to make sure I'm not a threat now? It doesn't know if I committed a crime while traveling or not. Okay, so I'm going to answer this, Jim, and I want you to. First, Jim is not saying they did commit crimes in other countries, so they might threaten our rights. What he's saying is that without vetting, we can't know what their criminal history is. Also, in my view, and I'm actually sympathetic to Ian's view. But the government, you're already screened before ever leaving the country. I mean, you have a passport, ID, all types of things.
And you've got that whole criminal record. You've been vetted your whole life. Yeah. And like I say, if you were just there on a business trip or as a tourist and you're coming back in, now they're only going to need reasonable articulable suspicion about you. On the other hand, if we don't have that background, if you truly are a foreigner, and for every 1,000 foreigners that come in, there will be some criminals. I don't know what the percentage is, but there will be. It's a fact. It's not like it's speculative. So in those numbers, there will be. And look, when it comes to protecting us from physical threats, there are times when totally innocent people will get detained on reasonable suspicion. The yellow tape will go up. You can't just waltz onto a military base. You can't just, but look, even a private building, if it's a crime scene or just not just a disaster scene, let's say there's a fire going on in the building, can they restrict people from coming and going around a crime scene or a fire scene or a physical danger scene or quarantine for disease? Again, totally innocent. See, it doesn't hinge on the moral innocence of the people involved. There could be situations in which it could be conceivable for the government to quarantine because of a deadly infectious disease. This isn't turning on their innocence, and this isn't impacting their rights otherwise. You cannot present a chance of physical harm, death, or great bodily injury to other people. You simply cannot. And if there is a chance of death or great bodily injury, the government has a right to take reasonable steps to prevent that. It's that simple. You can't interfere with cops when they're engaged in, they can close a whole highway. Now, take it, as I say, it's sort of the inside out of it, because we know there's this great unknown out there, a great unknown filled with hostile entities to the United States, terrorists, spies, saboteurs, people who are coming in to start biolabs from China, people who are arms dealers from Iran, just to take a couple of recent headlines. We know that there are hostile forces against the United States. We know there's a certain percentage of criminals. We just don't know if they've been properly investigated. We don't know about their definitions of crimes. We do know that there's a certain percentage of people who are criminals. And the good case scenario, like I say, is a country that, like Britain or Canada, say, where we can have a criminal conviction and we can go by their criminal records substantially. Other places we simply don't. And they might have to wait longer. Sorry.
Jim, Akira Felix wants to know if you agree with Adam Mossoff about taking away green cards for expressing support for Hamas.
I don't think we should have given green cards to anyone who supported Hamas. Okay, because again, I take people, when it comes to foreign people trying to come in, foreigners, I would have a different standard indeed than I would for people here when it comes to, say, free speech altogether. I absolutely would. I would say that they represent a threat of physical harm if they advocate terrorism, belong to a terrorist group. And so what the hell are these people doing being given permanent residency permission to come into the United States? That sounds risky to me, yeah. And the safety of the people within the country, the protection of the rights of the people within the borders is the sole responsibility of the United States. The United States cannot protect rights violations going on in foreign countries. I'm afraid murderers in France are not the business of the United States government, even if they're murderers in France. We cannot enforce laws outside of our borders. We can't protect the rights of French people, even against murderers. They're in France. That's the whole distinction.
But what about his question, Jim? What if they're already on a green card here?
Then they should be revoked.
So if somebody,
Goodbye, Mr. Khalil.
So if a college student that's here on a green card says, for instance, that he thinks that Israel is an oppressive colonial power and he thinks Hamas has the right to strike them, you would say that person should be kicked out of the country?
Like I say, I'm hearing these questions for the first time.
Yeah.
There would come a point of abstraction in their advocacy. In other words, someone would say, I am a hardcore Muslim. Okay, I don't think that in itself should do it. On the other hand, there's an other end of the spectrum. It's clear. I believe that Hamas is doing good and that Israel is engaged in genocide and October 7th was fully justified. No, that person we can exclude.
So if the person says that, but doesn't want to send them any money, won't send them any money, won't do that himself or herself, just the mere words get rid of the person. I mean, what's the Brandenburg test, for instance? Isn't the Brandenburg test?
Not you. That's exactly it. The Brandenburg test. Brandenburg is a famous United States Supreme Court case which sort of defined the lines of free speech. And free speech means you can advocate rotten ideas in the abstract, but it's only when those ideas actually become a credible specific threat or are connected with. Okay, so I would not use the Brandenburg test here. And fortunately, the United States Supreme Court has been very clear. That's not the test we need to use when admitting people into the United States.
But I'm talking about people already here. See, this is the problem that
people
I'm having.
already here. Okay, that isn't interesting. Let me think about that for a second.
The reason I'm curious, Jim, and the reason I find it problematic.
Okay.
If we are to argue that human beings by their nature have rights, individual rights, and that the only proper time to use force is in defense of rights, and somebody is here and then we kick them out for saying things, we're basically saying because you happen to not be born here or naturalized, you don't have the same rights, the same individual rights. I'm not talking about government, delineated rights.
Well, look, when the way it should be is we should extract certain promises from people as they come into the country. For example, the non-advocacy of first of all, you won't commit a crime, right? And by the way, you won't advocate because it says, a student, let's say a student visa, you're here simply for educational purposes, that you won't advocate for that. It should be front loaded. So it's not a violation of their rights because they are temporary visitors or green card. That's permanent residency. So we should do the investigation up front. Let's put it that way. I think people here, you create an interesting, and I haven't really thought that through. If they have been granted it, and if they haven't violated, say, the promise that they made when they came in for whatever purposes, should the Brandenburg test apply? That's an interesting question. I might be sympathetic to that.
Yeah. See, this is where honestly, I run into sort of problems in my own thinking. Because in my own thinking, I can see the argument. Okay, if you've got somebody coming over here from countries that are filled with people that express bad ideas, they're over here expressing these bad ideas, I can understand that can lead to serious problems. But then there's the other side of it that, well, then I end up arguing that somehow being born in America gives somebody more rights than other. And I don't believe that.
I don't think anything should turn on, well, let me put it this way.
Or naturalized, I should say.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even think that this should turn on citizenship, ever. Whether it's natural born or naturalized citizens. That's not what it turns on. But more than that, once a person is legally here and a permanent resident, but even in the communism cases from the 20th century, the Supreme Court acknowledged that you've gotten onto our radar screen. You've moved the dial by advocating the violent overthrow of the United States government. Right there, you've got our attention. Now, how serious, when does that become something that the law can really care about? Well, you've got to enact it. You've got to do something. You've got to take more steps than simply the advocacy of it. It seems to me, though, when it comes to foreigners coming into the country, once you've moved the dial, you advocate the violent overthrow of the United States. We can take preventative action. No, sorry.
So Robert,
I take people at their words. If someone said, I'm going to come into the country now this is unrealistic. Few criminals would say this, admit it out loud. I'm coming in. But if someone said, theoretically, or let's say we found out for some reason through correspondence, this guy says, I'm coming to the United States to commit bank robberies. We don't have to wait for a conviction in a foreign country like Great Britain or an investigation. We take them at their word.
But that's a specific threat. The question specifically that to get us back to the beginning was for expressing support for Hamas, should visas be revoked? So Robert Nasser, and here's I think is a great question. Now I'm getting bombarded with questions now. Let me get Robert's up on the screen. Robert says, is the First Amendment different for citizens and visitors? I would say, let me answer it first, and then I'll give you a crack at it. First of all, I think that this question that we're having, that this topic that we're having, while it can get mixed up with real life legal examples, it's really a philosophical discussion about what should be, not about what's legal and not legal.
Right.
So philosophically, I would say unequivocally that free speech should not be different for visitors and non-visitors. And under the First Amendment, I don't think it is legally, but I'm not entirely sure.
And I don't think it is either. And that's what I'm saying. We're not putting them in jail. Okay, but do bear in mind what the consequence here is. The consequence is not being allowed into the United States. The consequence is not being punished. The consequence is not putting them in prison, fining them. Understand that the First Amendment is protecting you is protecting your speech. So,
but Jim, I don't. Prison's not the only punishment.
Well, that's true.
If you say something I don't like, and I come up and carry you and move you somewhere else, has nothing to do with my property, and I say, hey, I'm not putting you in prison, you still would know I'm seriously violating your rights.
That's true, but the threshold at which a person's threatening words become, threatening words can be prosecuted, a threat.
Right, but that's not what Akira asked about.
Now, the question is, can the threshold for the threat from those words be different for people seeking entry into the United States as those already here? And I would say yes.
See, I would say that if you're doing that, you're saying that certain people have more rights than others. And I don't know.
What I'm saying is that the United States' job is to protect the people already here, all of them equally. We cannot protect the rights of people abroad.
But that person is already here.
Okay, if the person is already here because of some mistake that we made in allowing a person.
Well, maybe not even. You just didn't know. I mean, if somebody could have had not really a strong opinion on the situation, then
Right.
they come here, and then there's a war breaks out in Gaza. They're exposed to a certain media diet, so they take a certain view of it. There was no way to stop it from happening, but now they have the view.
Well, let me answer the bottom line. If they are legal permanent residents, they have the same. I would give them the Brandenburg test.
Awesome. Okay, Bonnie Bertrand. I want to read her question because she asked it, even though you kind of just answered it. I do want to ask her question anyway. Bonnie says, "Can't you tell them to leave for words?" Her quotes, not mine. Because they are not U.S. citizens and do not enjoy the same protection. The context is they're not citizens of any kind.
I don't think it should turn on citizenship. The rights under the Constitution turn on personhood and whether you're within the jurisdiction of the United States. Those are the only relevant questions, it seems to me, legally speaking. It's not citizenship. That's why in the last answer, it is connected. I would say anyone who has legal permanent residence in the United States should be treated the same as citizens. The rights, the 14th Amendment made this really wonderfully clear. It distinguished person from citizen and then insisted that privileges and immunities, due process, equal protection apply to persons.
Right.
Persons. So there's two things that have to happen. The person has to be, one, a human being, and two, within the jurisdiction of the United States, and truly within the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, it's very interesting because that very phrase is exactly what the Supreme Court is considering in the birthright citizenship case that's still pending, and we may not find the answer out, the detailed answer out for until the end of June. But it seems to me that if you are a human being subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, the same rights apply to you, citizenship notwithstanding.
So this is a test that I try to give myself in all my thinking, Jim. And it reminds me of reading when I read George Reisman's masterpiece, Capitalism, a Treatise on Economics. And he talked about his early debates with Ayn Rand. And he said that she would show that the things that he would support at this level would lead inevitably to consequences he would never support.
Right.
So when we're discussing a topic like immigration, I tried to see, okay, but what are the implications of this? What are the implications, for instance, of saying, well, citizens they have different rights when here than a legal permanent resident? What's the consequences of that? Does that mean that if two people get into a fight, for instance, one is a legal permanent resident, one is a citizen, do we automatically side with the citizen? No, you would never do that. But so there's a lot of examples that we could probably think of.
I don't think that, in fact, citizenship is probably not relevant let me try and figure out a criminal or civil case where I think citizenship would be a relevant fact.
Right. But if we start to say, well, in some instances that the rights of the citizen, what's the word I'm looking for, supervene the rights of a visitor or a legal permanent resident, it's gonna lead us down avenues that we
would have to be something as narrow as like voting.
Well, yeah, that's voting. I agree. That's not an individual natural
but
right,
it's hard for me to. I mean, there may be a couple of things that I'm not thinking of, but it's pretty narrow list like voting, where just citizens have
right, jury duty, voting.
Thank you. Jury duty, things like that.
Right.
But that's all. I mean, voting, juries.
Those are process things.
Yeah, process.
Yeah, those are process rights.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So
do note that voting, depending on the jurisdiction, many jurisdictions have, used to be when I was a prosecutor, nearly every state, a felon, some still had a felony on their record, could not vote. But many states have changed that, and it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
I think Connecticut's changed it, where I can vote now, and people are like, "Oh, well, why don't you vote?" And well, give me a good option. Maybe I will.
Michael, if I was the king of the world, you'd have 10 votes. So,
well, if I was the king of the world, you'd be the only candidate. So, Jason Adams has a different question here. He says. And he gives us, I think this is $10, 200 Czech crowns. He says, just because Ayn Rand herself said something does not make it part of objectivism, i.e. about a woman president and Marilyn Monroe's death. Brilliant aesthetic period pieces we can learn from. What exactly delimits what objectivism is? I'm going to give my answer first. This is one of the reasons I do not want. I stopped calling myself an objectivist, because Ayn Rand herself never wrote a book like Leonard did, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, that specifically put forth every tenet of the philosophy. She's written essays, articles, done interviews. And while I have a very good sense of what objectivism is, given that I'm not 100% clear in my own mind, and given that she said, if you don't agree with all the tenets, you're not an objectivist, and given her very real skepticism about anybody even using the term, that's why I myself don't call myself that. But Jim, go ahead.
Well, Jason, I'd say that that OPAR, which Leonard goes out of his way to say is not official objectivist doctrine. Right. In the beginning of the book, he says this isn't objectivism, because Ayn Rand never looked at it. On the other hand, what he did is he extracted her philosophical principles and showed how they hang together. In doing that, he kind of gave us the distinction between the philosophical principles that Ayn Rand articulated. Ayn Rand had opinions on any number of things, as you pointed out. I happen to agree with her about Marilyn Monroe. I happen to disagree with her about a woman president. I love skyscrapers. Aquamarine throw pillows are not my favorite. So she's got opinions about a great many things, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't agree with. But it's only her philosophical principles that are objectivism. Now, if Ayn Rand herself gave us, because Ayn Rand wrote about a range of issues from inflation to wage and price controls to the draft to abortion to the FCC to antitrust laws. I mean, this woman gave us the college unrest in the 60s. She gave us her opinions on a whole host of things. Right. And when she applies it, we should pay attention to her application of those principles, because this is how she sees them applied. I think we've got to bear not only in mind the principles, but how she applied them, because it is the instructive guide on what those principles, the scope and application of those principles. Now, unfortunately, with immigration, we have no such, even though she wrote about nearly every other political issue under the sun, we don't have that with her. I think she was generally pro-immigration, like I am. I think all law-abiding, peaceful people should be given an opportunity, let me put it this way, to come to the United States. There's no question. Does the United States government have a right to protect people from physical threats of force? Yes, that is their job. And it's the people in the United States who is their charge to protect, because they simply can't protect everyone's rights. And it would be violating the jurisdiction of other countries. So it's up to us as individual objectivists to apply the principles of individual rights that she gave us in this case. But no, Leonard Peikoff, take Understanding Objectivism, read the book Understanding Objectivism, and you'll see, you don't have to share Ayn Rand's opinion on everything. Ayn Rand had opinions about a great many things that you can't.
My beard?
It's so funny. I met this radio interviewer of Ayn Rand when she was an older lady. He had a beard, Raymond Newman. And I was talking to Raymond, and the very first time Ayn Rand met him was, Raymond, you're such a handsome face. You'd be so much more handsome if you didn't have the beard. So I don't think beards are a philosophical issue. I don't. And even if you're not thrilled, by a skyscraper, you can still be an objectivist. Aquamarine is your favorite color? No, come on. Obviously, a great many of Ayn Rand's opinions have really no direct relation to objectivism.
So Bonnie Bertrand is going to disagree, and she says not with that, but with the other stuff we were talking about. She says a green card holder is not a citizen. The difference needs to be taken into context.
I would restrict voting and juries, and there may be a couple of other things I'm not thinking of right now, but I think it's a very, very narrow list of what I would call privileges, not rights. When a person is here and under the jurisdiction of the United States, all it takes is being a human being. And you've got rights.
I have a question for you, Jim, because I remember seeing this. Greg Lewis says for the New Intellectual, ahead of Galt's speech, it's preferenced by Ayn Rand with, this is the philosophy of objectivism. Now, I remember seeing that, but that was years ago. And when I subsequently tried to find it, I could not. It's that
a subsection that introduces Galt's speech, right?
Yeah, but I don't, but when I tried to find it, online, no.
I'm sure I've got an old copy of For the New Intellectual that has that very introduction to Galt's speech.
Well, why don't you go get it?
Really?
Yeah, I'd like to know. I'm curious now.
Okay. Let me see if I can find it. It has to be quick or I won't do it.
All right, it's got to be quick. Let me see some things. So Jason Adams says he understands from a Peikoff podcast it is based on John Galt's speech, which is the end-all for those principles. Mr. Deagle says if they are supporting somebody America is at war with, then they should be deported.
Jeez.
You found it?
Alas, no. And it
All
will
right.
take me longer.
All right. Okay.
But wait a minute. When she published For the New Intellectual, she had not yet published, mind you, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. There are more than a couple. There are several of Ayn Rand's essays that she wrote after Galt's speech and published after For the New Intellectual. For the New Intellectual was her first book, strictly speaking, on philosophy that she ever published. So in her first book, where she even names the philosophies For the New Intellectual, Objectivism is where she announces it. It's For the New Intellectual, where she says it's Objectivism, I call it. It was subsequent to that she published The Virtue of Selfishness, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. It wasn't until practically the year of her death that Philosophy Who Needs It came out, and I think some of those essays are critical.
So Robert Nasser says his copy of For the New Intellectual has that subtitle. What I'm wondering is, did Ayn Rand put it there? That's my question.
Oh, you better
That's
believe
my question.
Every semicolon in an Ayn Rand book was approved by her. She was very, very strict about all the promotional material that her publishers would use. After The Fountainhead, she had a certain oomph with her publishers.
And Jim, didn't she also, as far as I know, or I think I know, she actually did sanction 2 separate lecture series. The first one given by Nathaniel Branden at MBI, and then in 1976, she said, until and unless I write something, this is the only course that I advocate, the one given by Leonard.
The one I know from personal knowledge to be true and correct. Right, yeah.
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, I have not listened to that entire lecture from
And
76.
you know, there are all kinds of valuable insights and developments in Brandon's. Like, you know what? I first saw the Brandon lectures. I got them on vinyl LP back in the days of vinyl. Remember old vinyl records? He had reduced it to vinyl LP, and then I had to convert it over to magnetic tape so that I could listen to Brandon's lectures. There's a lot of insight in those, but compared to Leonard's, Dr. Peikoff's 1970s course, it is disintegrated. That is to say, you go from one topic to another, and then this, and then over here. What Peikoff does is systematically integrate it, and he also has much better formulations in some of it. So in my view, Peikoff's course is, from a philosophical standpoint, a much better one because it shows the integration between her principles. But well, I could not, if you were to say to me, this is the philosophy of objectivism, John Galt's speech would be my go-to place. On the other hand, I would urge people to still read certain other things like her monograph on concepts, the objectivist ethics, causality versus duty. I think all of those would be essential.
See, I don't think the material covered, and it's been a long time since I read Atlas Shrugged, but the conditional nature of ethics, meaning if you want this, then you must do this. I don't think that's presented in Galt's speech. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Galt says that it boils down to a single fact, existence exists, and to a single choice, the choice to live. So in a way she does, and she applies it, and she quotes it later on in her application of that. Now I can understand a person not really fully getting it clear, and there are times when it's mind-blowing. Peikoff himself had this experience over and over. Did you say this? She said, yeah, did you get that in Atlas Shrugged? And he'd say, what, I read Atlas Shrugged, of course, where is it? And she'd point out on page whatever, and he'd say, oh, but I thought that meant this. It did mean that, but I was also saying, oh, and then it would click into place, and he would say, I see how you're, but that's very subtle. And so she did need to write many essays after her novels to really clarify and specify what she meant about some of these principles. Yes.
Jim, I'm right now reading, and don't feel too much pity for me, Immanuel Kant's The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals.
You poor man.
Well, I will say this. It's far more readable than was the Critique of Pure Reason.
Yes, it is. But in one way, it's more straightforwardly evil, though, too.
Well, that's true.
I mean, at best, we can be accidentally selfish if we don't really intend to be selfish.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Someone's going to be joining us on that soon. Oh, Persephone, I think. You're going to be reading that, Persephone? So, Jim, what have you had a chance to read your immigration article since it's been published?
No, I haven't.
You should.
I got tired of when I was going over it week after week with Dr. Peikoff.
The reason I ask is I'm curious if you read it again, if you would change anything, alter the formulation.
I really should, but I need, what happens is that when you go over and over and over something, you get too close to it.
Yeah.
And you need a good editing being a little tip for, unexperienced writers, step away, do something else, clear your head, have the ginger that clears the palate, as Japanese chefs would say, and then come back to it and look at it with fresh eyes. I am certain I've made some mistake in there someplace.
All right. Mr. Deagle's hounding me now about something, so I have to find what it is. The thing is, Mr. Deagles, I wanted to give everybody a chance, and you asked about 40 different questions. I did ask that question, Mr. Deagle. I think... if inside a country a police officer can stop somebody only if they have a reasonable suspicion. I did ask that, right?
Yeah.
There's another one about inside the country, Persephone's telling me?
But look, think about that. An innocent person might be, it is just reasonable suspicion. You might be let go. Okay, I let you go.
Okay, Mr. Deagle says if one part of the country has a higher crime rate than another, should people from that part of the country be discriminated against?
No. The government is the one who has the burden of taking extra precautions to have more cops on the street. It should not, and it certainly cannot violate people's rights in some way because you live in a crime-ridden neighborhood. You know, when I lived in New York City, I lived in Bed-Stuy. But the people in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, Bedford Stuyvesant, Brooklyn have the same exact rights and should be treated by the police no differently than people who say live in White Plains. It's that would just simply be wrong under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, among other things. Now, should the government take additional steps if there's a high crime area? Absolutely. There should be more cops on the street, more, but that's not violating people's rights. That's just putting your resources in the correct place. Now, let me put it this way, too. I mean, there could be all kinds of other restrictions. I mean, if you're put on felony probation and there's a certain neighborhood where you've been associated with gangs or something, could the probation officer say, no, you can't live there? You can't hang out with those people anymore. We do that all the time with criminal probation. So, but that's, again, once a person has been gone through due process and we know they've violated someone's rights and their rights have thereafter been restricted because it's been proven in a court of law that they're a physical threat.
Makes sense? Mr. Deagle wants to know how does that integrate with your immigration stance?
Well, we can't treat people in France equally to the people in the United States. Start back where I said earlier. Unfortunately, we can't protect people from being murdered in France. We can't prosecute murderers who are French. So the point is that being outside the jurisdiction of the United States, I'm afraid we can't protect your rights. Don't expect us to protect your rights. We have no obligation to protect your rights. In fact, it would be a violation of the other country's sovereignty for the United States to extend its rights protection umbrella to the entire world. It's physically impossible, mechanically impossible, and it would be a violation of the country's own jurisdiction. We don't want to be hostile with them. So, but because people are coming in as immigrants, and this is the context, from this great unknown, a variety of jurisdictions or anarchy, that we have every right to filter them to make sure that there are not convicted rights violators, probable rights violators, people who intend to be rights violators.
All right. So Akira Felix says James became a prosecutor because of the thugs who attacked him. That day he became James the Prince Valiantino.
No, I wanted to be a trial lawyer from the time I was 11 years old. By the time I moved to New York City, I had in mind that I was going to be a trial lawyer doing justice. And it was stupidity on my part, in part, that caused me to get beat up. And you know something, it's funny. People say you're a victim of a crime. You're going to hold it against whatever the group of people is or the place or the race or no, I never harbored any of those kind of resentments against the place, the people, the race of the people who did it. But it did, let me put it this way. Did I even call the cops? No, it was only going to cause me greater problems even to call the cops.
You would have got arrested for the assault.
For my assault. No, I didn't think that it would likely result in anything. And I didn't want to go through the hassle. And I didn't want to piss off people in the neighborhood. So guess what? I did not report the crime, even though I later became an agent of law enforcement.
Mr. Deagle says James is secretly the Batman. Mr. Deagle, I know you're not American, but it's not the Batman. It's just Batman.
My secret identity has been revealed. Please. But if I was going to be someone, I think if I'm going to be a fantasy comic book character, I'm Spider-Man. When I was a kid, I was always Spider-Man, Pete Parker, man. And what was cool about Spider-Man is that he operated not in cooperation with the police like Batman. Batman's operating with, Commissioner Gordon and stuff, hand in hand with the cops. One of the cool things about Spider-Man is he's out there and the cops are almost after him as much as they are the criminal. Is that a confession on my part that I liked the free agent Spider-Man more than Batman?
I don't know, but I do want you to give what your thoughts on the latest developments that you know of anyway that's going on with Iran. What's your thoughts?
Well, if you'd asked me a few days ago, it seemed to me quite certain, and I'm still leaning in that direction. Trump doesn't want any more. He's all done. We're finished, out of here. But the Iranians may be so irrational. I mean, think of the generous deals that he's offering them. They could be so irrational. They want to close the Strait of Hormuz now. Oh dear God! You're forcing Trump's hand in doing something I'm sure at this point Trump does not want to do. Reinitiate a series of bombings in Iran. That's my impression. Let me put it that way.
That's what I think too. I wouldn't be surprised if coming up in the next few months, if Trump starts blaming others within the administration for the Iran war.
You better believe the minute something goes south, he's gonna look for people to blame.
People will be fired. He'll say,
heads
I really didn't want to do it. This guy,
they were rotten from the start, even though he was the one who promoted them and gave them over the top compliments when he appointed them. Yes.
Oh, look at this $1.99 super sticker from the late arriving Gary Menard. Thank you, Gary. So from the other day, I asked a question about some good comedies. Jenna Kleem said Trading Places. Love Trading Places. One of my favorite comedies as a kid. Yeah. Why a kid was watching Trading Places, I don't know, but I was allowed.
Old good comedy movies. Okay. Groucho Marx, Bob Hope.
Jim, I got to read from the commenters. I wasn't asking you to come in and tell me.
I'm not going to throw in. I'm just a volunteer,
Death at
What's
a Funeral.
Up, Doc? With Barbara Streisand. That's a good one. That was kind of a remake of Bringing Up Baby, the Katharine Hepburn.
I love that movie. That's a great movie.
Yeah.
All right. So you go ahead now, Jim, and give us your capitalist thought of the day. That's on you.
The government exists to protect us from the
Jim,
threat.
If you get into defending your immigration paper, I'm going to go nuts. I want a fresh capitalist thought of the day.
A fresh capitalist.
You're such a prosecutor, like you got to get the last word.
I am, and I used every bit of my time. Capitalism requires an intellectual defense. Going by an emotion, complaining about the rise of socialism on the American left, from places, guys like Mamdani or the newly elected congresswoman from New Jersey, complaining about how far they've gone socialist. You're not going to, my right-wing friends, you're not going to fight socialism by promoting Patrick Deneen. You're not going to fight socialism by caving in principle to it, time and time again, as the Trump administration does. You need an intellectual and an intellectually consistent defense if you mean to fight socialism. Capitalism requires an intellectual, philosophical defense, and that means going all the way back to moral principles. And of course, that will require us getting our epistemological principles straight too. But there's nothing short of a full-fledged, consistent, philosophical defense of capitalism can do it. So all those right-wing commentators panicking about the rise of socialism on the left, you guys, you ain't going to find it in the Bible. This is not going to be found there. You ain't going to find it in Patrick Deneen's rejection of the Enlightenment and individualism, and you're not going to find it in Mr. Trump's aggressive monopoly enforcement, or his price controls, or his mortgage restrictions, or all the other economic regulations. Once you compromise like that, you're now negotiating over the spoons with the socialists. So my conservative friends, if you really don't want socialism, you need to get your act together. You need to get consistent, and you need to get philosophical.
Negotiating over the spoons with socialists.
Yeah.
All right. I'll go for it. All right. Everybody, thank you very
Best
much.
I can do.
Yeah. Remember, today we've got Everyday Ethics at 2:30. We will be continuing answering objections to the Objectivist ethics. 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time, we have Crime, Corrections, and Culture.
Great show.
We'll, of course, be back here tomorrow. And my question is, what is your favorite book, fiction or nonfiction, your favorite book? Please go to the YouTube channel, the rational alternative and answer the question. We will be back tomorrow. Thank you very, very much. Until then, please check your premises. Peace.